Good morning, Ecclesbourne. Welcome to this morning's assembly, given by myself, Mr. Atkinson. You might or might not know me. If you do, I very much apologise. The rest of you have literally no idea who I am. Well, I'm head of politics and sociology at A-level, and, what am I doing in your rooms today? I'm checking you out, actually. No, seriously. I'm here to give an assembly, and it's on the very engaging and exciting topic of legal rights in the UK. It is kinda. I'm going to be talking about Magna Carta, which, according to one of my favourite books, is, of course, Latin for, and here it is, by the way, my favourite book, one of my favourite books. Hang on. There we go. Peregrine Peabody's completely misleading history of the world. According to this, it's Latin for big cart. So what it was a bunch of very rich people, nobles and landowners, got the king to grant them what they always wanted, which was a bigger cart, Magna Carta. Unfortunately, that very large cart needed a very large horse to pull it, and it turned out a lot of these rich landowners hadn't really thought ahead and didn't have the large horses required to pull the cart. This led to the modern statement, putting the cart before the horse. The government did try to bring in some horses, but it turned out there was an international shortage of horses, and some of them had to be put up on bricks, which was called hiring a horse, which later got changed to horses for hire. And it wasn't very good. It led to a civil war and it all died. And that is the story of Magna Carta. Thank you very much for listening. And of course not. Of course, that's not what Magna Carta is. Of course, that's not how that goes. Let's do this properly. Sorry. Magna Carta starts in 1215, or 12:15, as historians call it. Now, it's worth pointing out that in a survey in 2015, 84% of Britons argued that the 15th of June, 1215, the date of the signing of the Magna Carta, was the most recognisable date and the most important date in British history. Another survey in the same year found that 97% of Britons had literally no idea what Magna Carta was. So I'm going to try and fix that a little bit. By the end of this assembly, I'm hoping you will know what Magna Carta was. Now, some of what I said previously is true. In 1215, at a place called Runnymede, the king, King John, shown here from Robin Hood's King John, Disney's Robin Hood, King John, met with a bunch of nobles and rich people, landowners. We call them barons, B-A-R-O-N-S, and they met to sign a peace treaty. There'd been a civil war, you see. King John had hugely raised taxes in an effort to pay for a war to gain back lands that he'd lost to the King of France. And the barons were unhappy about that. For all intents and purposes, he was pretty much tyrannical. He used to take the sons of rich people hostage if they couldn't pay the taxes. And at least on one occasion, he seems to have starved a noblewoman and her children to death in an effort to get money out of one of his nobles. Now, this was pretty common in the Middle Ages, but everyone seems to have hated King John, so this is as good a reason as any. This peace treaty in 1215 was called Magna Carta. Now, it turns out that Magna is Latin for big, but Carta is Latin for chart or charter. It was a written document. Now, at Runnymede, there wasn't just one Magna Carta that the king set his seal to. There were 15 copies made on the same day, and they were taken to all the major towns and cities and one monastery to be displayed so that everyone knew that it was there. I say everyone. It was about freed men, and freed men were solely the nobles, the rich people, the landowners. Everyone else in England at the time were serfs, and they were owned by the lords, and they couldn't read, and this document didn't mean anything to them. So what did the document actually set out? Well, it set out a bunch of stuff that up until that point was what people expected, but it had never been written down. It had allowed King John to ignore some of the rights and privileges that these people felt they were owed. And one of them, in particular, because they spoke a civilised language, was the ability to talk about how the country should be run. Now, because they spoke civilised French and Latin, that meant they wanted to parley, and they wanted a place in which to parley a lot. or in the French, a parliament. You might recognise that term because theoretically that's how the country is still run today. We vote for people to go to parliament. Well, these nobles, these barons, voted for people among their number to go to a parliament, and I believe it was one of the terms in that original Magna Carta of 1215. However, I think there might be a problem here, because in 1216, the king, King John, asked the Pope to say that the treaty had never happened, because he didn't think that any king should be limited by a written document. The Pope agreed, and the document ceased to have any function. Then King John ended up fighting his nobles again and died of dysentery in the same year. So that went really well for him. His son, Henry, issued Magna Carta again in 1216 and again in 1217, where it was split out into two things. There was the Magna Carta and the Charter of the Forest. And then again in 1225, which I would argue is the proper date, because this is the actual version that still has 3 clauses in law today. And this is where I think it gets relatively interesting. This is a document that was written well over 800 years ago. Well, not 800 now, I suppose. That would be 795 years ago. And 3 bits of it are still affecting our lives today. Here they are. The first is, in future, no official shall place a man on trial upon his own unsupported statement without producing credible witnesses to it. Now, what this means is, if you're accused of a crime, you have to have people come and say how they know you're guilty of that crime. If they don't, well, then you're automatically innocent. You can't be taken to trial. You can't be locked up for it. That sounds like a simple point, but this is the first time it was written down, and it's still in force today. You cannot be locked up because someone says you're guilty of a crime. It must be proven in a court of law. The second is, no free man shall be seized or imprisoned, or stripped of his rights or possessions, or outlawed or exiled, or deprived of his standing in any other way, nor will we proceed with force against him, or send others to do so, except by the lawful judgment of his equals, or by the law of the land. Now, what does this mean? It basically means that if the police break the law, then you cannot be arrested by those policemen as they're breaking the law. Furthermore, you must have actually broken a law in order for anybody in the pay of the monarchy or the government to do anything against you. Anything else will require a court or a law allowing them to do so. We call this negative liberty. It means that you are free to do anything the law doesn't say you can't. And that's how it works in this country. And this is the first time it was written down. Now, it's worth pointing out this principle, this idea, had been around for a very long time by this point anyway. It doesn't matter. This is the first time it was written down, and therefore it's an important document because it's still on the books of our law today. And finally, to no one will we sell, to no one deny or delay right or justice. Now, that doesn't sound like much, but this actually turned up quite recently. The government said that to go to a tribunal, which is a court case about being sacked from your job and you think that they got it wrong somehow, you had to pay £3,000 up front. When this went to the Supreme Court, it was found that according to Magna Carta, that was selling justice. Because if you were innocent, if it turned out you were in the right, you didn't have to pay £3,000. Your court case fees will be paid for by the person that lost. If you have to pay that up front, well, you're buying justice. And on those grounds, the government was found to have acted unlawfully, and the whole idea of paying in advance for a tribunal was quashed. And that was in 2019. So here we have a document written in 1225, settling a court case in 2019. That's pretty important. And you're like, all right, sir, I understand that Magna Carta is important. Thanks, that's great. But you also said, sir, this only applies to free men. How can it possibly still apply today? Well, thank you, rhetorical device. Let me explain here. Here is John Ball, a very famous priest, and he famously said, when Adam delved and Eve span, who then was a gentleman? Because following the Black Death in 1348, all the people of England were like, hang on a minute, we're worth something. We should be paid for what we're doing. And the landowners who were saying things like, well, is this some kind of peasant joke that rich people don't get? Didn't like that idea. And the peasants got really angry, and led by people like John Ball, who essentially said, what's a rich person anyway? Why do they have all the power? They went and confronted the king and demanded to be made free men. And that was the only promise the king kept. And in making them free men, he essentially granted them the rights of Magna Carta. And that meant that Magna Carta now applied to everybody in England. When England took over the rest of the British Isles, it applied to everyone in the United Kingdom. This means that any old idiot, you, me, anybody, can now apply Magna Carta to our lives. Meaning that this document, written in 1225 in its definitive version, was made into the thing it is today in 1381. Now, I am a historian. I might be head of politics, I might be head of sociology, but at the end of the day, I am a historian, and therefore I'm going to tell you that dates are important, and I'm going to say that knowing dates is a useful thing. But again, I remind you that in 2015, most people had literally no idea what was in Magna Carta, even though they knew the date, June 1215. I put it to you that Magna Carta is far more important than a date. And the three clauses that are still in Magna Carta, that are still in force today, are among the most important clauses ever. Now, there are other clauses that are still in force. Those are the three that need to detain us here. We don't live in the City of London. We don't have ancient rights. But those things are pretty darn important, and I think are the most likely to affect you as you go forward in your lives. It does mean that nobody can tell you what to do or tell you you've broken a law unless A, the law exists, and B, they provide an evidence through a witness saying that you actually have broken the law. I'm hoping that this therefore was interesting, and I'm hoping therefore that when you go home tonight you can tell your parents what you learned today. When they say, what did you do at school today, dear? You can say, well, mother, I learnt about Magna Carta and how 3 of the clauses are still in use today, and indeed separate me from people in other countries where they can just be sent to jail on the whimsy of a ruler. And now kindly leave me alone while I eat my tea. On that basis, I hope you have a lovely rest of your day. Thank you very much for listening. And who knows, you may see me around, and I apologise for that too. Bye-bye now.